I'm Charles Mangan, the head Mac nerd N-able, and here is my smug mug. If you have any questions after the webinar, or you just want to reach out and tell me how awesome I am. That brings me to my introduction for Marc-Andre. His forte is automation. He's the head automation nerd, and he's also in charge of keeping me in line. So say hello, Marc.
Hey, good afternoon, everyone. Glad you could make it. We have a nice group today. This is our second ticket at Cannes for this specific course. I wrote the course about a month ago. Hopefully, this is going to give you guys some good value. Our role as the nerds is to help you guys learn, be more efficient, be better into what you do day to day. So this course is no different. My purpose is just to, with this course, is to help you use the platform better. If you are new to the platform, how to deploy it. If you're already deployed it, months or years ago, how can you improve it? And that's really what it came down to. On the screen, you see my Twitter, my LinkedIn. If you don't know me already, you can follow me there. That's where I post when we do new stuff. Other than that, thank you for being here and welcome.
Thank you, Marc. Let's go ahead and get a little bit of information about you so we know who we're talking with and make sure we're not telling you a bunch of things you already know, or maybe you do and you need a refresher. So question number one, coming up here in just a second, is what is your primary role? Show you the results. Looks like we've got a pretty good mix of business owners, technicians, and the multiple hat wearers. I'm familiar with that category myself. I was basically a one-man MSP for many years, so I know all the hats. I wouldn't say that I wore them well, but I know them. So the next question, how long have you been using RMM? We've got, again, another pretty even split between the newbies and the veterans. Glad to see that there's another good mix. And like I said, there's going to be people on both ends of that spectrum. How many devices do you have currently deployed with RMM? This time we have a pretty well weighted to the smaller end of the spectrum. Most everyone's less than 250, which is great. Means you're starting and hopefully growing your install base and growing with the platform. So excellent. So here is what we're going to cover today. And I will warn you, we ran long on the presentation this morning, partly because Marc-Andre wrote the content and he talks a lot faster than I do, which you'll hear when he gets into doing the demos. Quick overview to begin with, we'll talk about the importance of proper onboarding, whether you're just starting out, like many of you are, or if you've been with us for many years, which some of you are as well. We're going to talk all about the sort of the right way, or the recommended way at least, to configure your deployments, tweak the basic default settings to make things work better and to make your life easier. And that'll also keep your clients happy, which will make your life easier. And then we're going to go all the way through the process to onboarding, from prep work all the way to deployment, and then making sure it's working right, and then cover reporting at the other end, which is the post deployment and where you show your work. And after you've gone through this boot camp, probably still have some questions or need a refresher. We're also going to mention during the boot camp a number of other video resources, boot camps, and training series for you to check out if you're still starting out and learning the platform, learning about things like take control and backup and the other features that we offer. We've got a huge library of videos and resources for you to refer to as far as what's latest and greatest in update notes, training videos, like I said, publications, white papers, and that also includes marketing resources for growing your business. So the Partner Success Center is a big help. And we also have the Automation Cookbook, which is sort of something that I've been contributing to a bunch since I started. And it's got 500 scripts, policies, and profiles and things that you can grab to install on your customers' machines, either as is or really easily customize them to fit your needs and the needs of your specific install base. So the old adage is garbage in, garbage out. And if you start out on the wrong footing with onboarding a new client, you're potentially going to be swamped with tickets that you shouldn't be bothered with, or you won't get any tickets and you'll miss things that are going wrong because the machines were offline, or they were just overlooked in that onboarding process. So we'll talk a little bit about the onboarding process. So onboarding is key. It dictates what gets monitored, what gets ignored, what triggers an alert, what thresholds become higher priority, what shows up in those reports that you send to your customers at the end of the month whenever you do your regular reporting. This is also the time to set up automations and do those self-healing sort of tasks that remediate issues that come up without you having to involve a technician or pull tickets and things like that. It's time to decide what features you're going to be enabling, what you're going to configure them to do, and if your customers are asking for something that you haven't provided yet, what can you add on to your existing commitment? So all of these steps are to ensure that you're matching that commitment that you made, that your sales team may have made or your salespeople to the customers. They're getting what they're paying for. A lot of times there's a disconnect between the marketing and sales groups and the actual technicians that are doing the work. And so whether it's a matter of just different priorities or terminology or playing telephone across the network, you end up with promising more than you're delivering, or maybe you're working harder than you need to, and you should only be doing something once a month, but the technicians are doing it once a week because that's what they're used to. So having that communication between the two, it's a difficult sort of cultural thing, but it's definitely worth having the technical folks review those agreements and those contracts so that they can point out places where things are just not possible, or things are maybe we need to step that up because threats are coming faster than once a month now. The important thing is that you're covering your contract with your actual work, so you don't end up out of scope. And the typical scope of work is for a new client agreement, it might cover the basics of things like patching, keeping your workstations up to date, at least monthly or maybe more often. AV, antivirus stuff, keeping those definitions updated, monitoring for malware, reporting, monitoring, whole long laundry list of services, kind of depending on what the customer's priorities are. But in general, the service level agreements, there's a set of critical items that will get immediate attention. You've got that, the pager on your hip for that 1 hour turnaround. Things that are high priority that might be 24-hour turnaround or 1 business day. Everything else maybe 48 hours or 2 business days, kind of depending on what your setup is. And those may be 24/7 or just office hours. And obviously these are generic examples, but yours will be specific to your business. But in any case, it's important to know what your customers are signing up for. If you've promised to do something, you need to set it up the right way so that you actually get it done. If it's an existing customer that you've had for a while, it's good to review that SLA, that scope of work from time to time when you're actually monitoring those things, and make sure that you're doing it correctly on the RMM side. So as far as those SLA levels and the scope of work, you might be familiar with SMART goals, S-M-A-R-T, from the corporate world, where you should make your goals or your SLA items the same way. They're specific and measurable, also achievable. So make a real world example, and there's no such thing as 100% uptime. You can even ask Facebook about that. And then the R and T are relevant and timely. So keep that in mind when you're creating those SLA levels, that you're not over promising something that doesn't exist in the real world. And so when you're looking at the requirements that you're selling and that your customers are expecting, we need to do a little translation sometimes between what your requirements, your contract says, and what you would do in RMM. And this slide has a lot of small text, but it's just showing a sort of translation from the SLA into how to map that on your RMM dashboard to fulfill those kinds of agreements. And just a quick note, we're not going to be publishing the slide deck. For one thing, it's a work in progress, but for another thing, we usually don't publish the decks themselves. So feel free to take screenshots if you want, especially slides like this that have a lot of content. I encourage it, and you can have those to refer to later on if you need to. things like links and our email addresses, that sort of thing. So sorry, I forgot to mention that up front, but yes, please feel free to screenshot. So for example, if your contract says that you'll patch the workstations on a monthly basis, set it up to install patches on a monthly basis. But you should also be setting a check for other patches that come in every week or two, and you don't get caught out by something that gets released out of cycle or just gets deferred, and you need to add alerts for those failed patches or things that don't get run. Again, alerting on high priority items. You need to work with your PSA integration to sort of prioritize those tickets, set up the relevant SMS alerts or email alerts for those things that are above a certain threshold. So you do get notified, and that's the way you monitor it. Agreed to monitor it, so you need to get notified, otherwise a lot's going to slip through the cracks. So where are you now? Let's take a little assessment. So anyhow, if you've been chugging along with the platform for a while, you may have adopted a sort of set it and forget it kind of stance. But have you ever read something that you wrote a year ago and wondered, what was I thinking? So does the you of now really trust the you from last year to have gotten it right the first time? It takes time away from selling and doing the actual work to review those SLAs and the contracts, but you really should allocate some time, whether it's weekly or quarterly, so you don't end up with a liability situation or lose a customer because you've gone too long without checking in on them. And if you're new to RMM, even if you've been using another solution up until now, go ahead and build that review time into your schedule. So you do your regular audits and not just when the contract comes around for renewal, or if it's an ongoing engagement, you never really renew it, so you don't have that built-in reminder. Set yourself a task, set yourself a reminder to review the current state of contracts, current number of machines that you're managing, that sort of thing, and then compare that with what's in the RMM that you've actually configured to do. So spoiler, just about everything that we're talking about is going to apply to everyone, whether you're on the new end of the spectrum or seasoned veteran, whatever you want to say. Creating, revising, revisiting the setup for your customers, for your sites, mapping and configuring new integrations or existing integrations with the other tools that we've got. Setting up the features that you support, all the way down to building and applying individual templates. There's a lot more that is not going to get covered in the 2 hours that we have here. There's writing automations, adjusting the recommendations, and all the new stuff that's coming out as far as new platforms and software and new versions of operating systems. It's always everything's always changing, so it makes sense to keep up to date on what you're doing. And the question, of course, is when. When do you find time? Well, you'll find that even after you go through the setup, follow all the recommendations, you might still miss some things. There's always edge cases. Every customer is different. Every MSP is different. And suddenly you're finding that the customer's laptops are all missing their patches because maybe you were used to setting them as if they were desktops to run at like 2 a.m. and the laptops are all off or hibernating at 2 a.m. So, or maybe you're getting tickets that are marked high priority that really should just be a notification or sent out, once a day, or after it's been missed 3 times instead of every time there's a little hiccup. So you set yourself, like I said, a recurring schedule, a reminder to revisit and clean up, and then follow up on those little tweaks that you might only notice or might only become apparent after you've used the platform for a little while, or after you've made a change and let it sort of settle in and rattle around for a little while. And so that's the lecture part of the presentation done with. Hopefully the message is pretty clear. That's why we do what we do. And before we get down to the actual work or prepare the mise en place, are there any questions, Mark, that we need to have a look at?
No, we're good.
Okay, great. Oh, there was a question about the link for the cookbooks.
Yeah, it's weird that you can do enable.com/cookbook or success.enable.com/cookbooks with an S. I don't know why. So some people get confused with the 2 links, but they both work.
Okay, great. So now it's time to lay the prep work down. one of the first integrations that you're going to want to use is a PSA, a professional services automation tool. And the time to integrate it into your customers and your site setup is at the very beginning when you create the sites in RMM. So you go about that slightly differently depending on your platform. But in general, if you start with a list of customers that you're deploying RMM with, and well, if you're starting from scratch, you make the integration connection and create the new customers in RMM, and then that will create the records for them in your PSA. If you've already set up the customers in your PSA and you're migrating to RMM, then you need to add them to RMM and do the same thing, create them, the customers and the sites in RMM first, and then you make the integration link, and then you map the two, the customers from RMM to the customers that you have in your PSA with the tools that we have to map one-to-one what you're managing and what you've already got in your PSA. And that's the way it'll work with ConnectWise, Autotask, and MSP Manager. Each one's a little bit different as far as the interface goes. With other tools, maybe you're using a PSA that is based on sending emails or SMS. You need to create the customers and sites just like you normally would, and then configure the alerting setup so that it goes to the proper email address, goes to the correct route for your PSA. And you'll need to refer to your documentation from PSA for any specifics as far as how to format emails and things. And start with the first demo. Mark, would you mind doing a demo of logging in and setting up the PSA integration?
Absolutely. Let me just switch presenter and log back into RMM because it kicked me out for security. And security is awesome.
I keep getting timed out as well.
So I'm gonna log. I'm gonna switch the presenter to me. Oh, there's two of us. That's confusing. Move that over. All right. So once we go into RMM, basically we integrate with a few PSAs. If you use basically ConnectWise or Autotask, or if you use MSP Manager. Oh yeah, I think I was using the wrong one. Okay. All right, security reasons. We're gonna have to wait a few seconds. So, well, it doesn't matter. It takes 2 seconds. So while that happens, the point of this is that in RMM, when you integrate the PSAs, you have a couple of ways to do it. If you use a built-in PSA integration, the way it works is that this lets you integrate through APIs. There it is. Through the APIs, which gives you a lot deeper integration. You can export assets. You can create customers. You can do all these things through the integration, which other way wouldn't be really possible. So this gives you a lot more flexibility. If you have a PSA that is not integrated, so it's not one of the three that we mentioned, you do it through email parsing. So let's go into RMM and let's make this a bit bigger because it's small. There you go. And if I go to PSA integration right here, if you have, once again, if you have ConnectWise, Autotask, or MSP Manager, which is the one that we have and sell ourselves, this will be allowed to say here, configure PS integration, and then you can basically see that integration. If you already have it mapped, the first thing you should do is go to issues. When you go to issues, there you go. If you have any problem with integration, this will go right here and show you. If it does not, I'm going to do exit. And if you have no issues, you're already mapped. What I usually do is say, go to configuration. If you already have it set up, take a look at these different tabs. Now, depending on which one of the three you will have a few different options. For example, you can choose the naming convention for tickets. You know, is it going to be the check name of the device or client and things like that. Depending on how you configure your client mapping, depending on how you do different things, you may want to choose different settings here. Another thing to consider is, do I want to auto create tickets? Now, obviously, you would likely want that because that is the whole point. You can also say, if you create tickets, don't send emails anymore. Now, you may or may not want that. That's up to you. Some people prefer to say, I don't want to get the emails anymore to a mailbox or to an email to SMS if I'm using that. So you get the option to disable that. And then, do I want to auto close ticket, or do I want to close ticket when a check clears, right? So whenever that cleans itself out, do I want to clean my tickets at the same time? So those are options that, as a company, you want to decide what you want to do. They're not enabled by default because some companies prefer to do it and some really don't want to touch that. So it's important to decide what makes sense to you. Another really cool option is that if someone deletes a server or a workstation from your environment in the RMM, you want to create a ticket to say, hey, that device was removed. This is pretty useful from a billing standpoint, and also to verify and audit, is that intended? Then you can go and take a look and see what happened. So you can choose this option right here. Now, depending on the PSA, you will have a few different options. For example, what is the account owner? What kind of category do you want to map the assets to, and so on. Do you want to map your clients, your sites, and everything else? All of these options allow you to auto-create data, which saves you time. So through your onboarding process with RMM, you should have done this, but if you did not for some reason, you want to come back here and revisit this, because that is going to save you a ton of time. A lot of people say, no, the integration is too noisy, I'm not going to set that up. And that's fair. But the problem is you lose so much valuable information that to me, it's absolutely worth doing. Then you can choose what are your ticket priorities, right? For this kind of alert versus this one, and so on. And then finally, do you want to map the asset data to create the assets from RMM to your PSA? So all of these options allow you to make your life easier as a tech or as an owner. Once you've done all that, or if you already have done all that, you can go to asset mapping, make sure everything's mapping properly. And if you ever need to change your credentials, you come right here and change it. Now, even if you are, or if you're not using the integrated PS integration, you can go to alerts right here and go to settings. And under here, you have the option to say, for these kind of devices, right, these three types, do I want to send alerts to this email, a different email, multiple emails? It tells you here what to do. And same thing for SMS. Now, SMS does have a cost, so please be careful if you're going to use that, because we have to pay an SMS gateway to send those. There's a cost. Now, you do have the option, if your phone provider allows it, to do a SMS, email to SMS, so like your phone number at like sms.att.com. There's different gateways that exist through different phone providers. I know the one I use in Canada, or is it Rogers? And when I do that, I get a text message saying, someone sent you an email to text, you have to approve it, and that's a per text basis, so it's super annoying. So for me, it wouldn't work very well, but most US providers do a really good job at it, so that might suit you very well. Once you've configured who gets the alerts for specific customers and through the integration, the last thing that you will want to visit, again, whether you use the integrated or not integrated, you come here and you go to alert policy. And here you choose, what is my threshold for server workstation, and then what do I alert on? So if we start here, for example, if you get alerts for an AV going like, oh, the AV failed to update. Honestly, this will happen sometimes for, really pick a reason. It could happen for anything. You have the option to say, only notify me if it fails 3 times in a row. If it doesn't update for, it updates every half hour and it doesn't update 3 times in a row, it's been an hour and a half, something's clearly wrong, then let me know. Don't waste my time every time it happens. Reduces the noise, right? If you have 100 devices, 1,000 devices, 10,000 devices or more, this becomes very noisy very quickly. And this is the same thing for any of those checks that you can see. If the CPU is maxed out, let me know after 4 times, and same thing for this, and same thing for this, and so on, so that I don't get notified every time the CPU spikes, because when my backup occurs at 10 o'clock at night or 11 o'clock at night, I keep getting messages that like, oh, the machine is slow. I'm like, well, yeah, duh, it's doing backups. So come here and tweak this. This is going to reduce your false positives. And then same idea for workstations if you want. And finally, the important part is, what do I want to notify on? What do I want to send SMS on? And what do I want to notify when it goes back to normal? And what do I want to SMS when it goes back to normal? So I can say, for example, a device outage or a service issue and whatever, those notify me when they fell and come back, or whatever you choose, right? And you can do that for all these checks for Windows, DSCs, Linux, and for the workstation, Windows, and Mac. Mac is only under workstation because they're assuming that there's no servers for Mac. And I know Charles can correct me for that, but officially speaking, most people will use their Mac as an end device. So because of that, that's where you would configure those. And by choosing what alerts you and what goes to your PSA, you then get proper, meaningful alerts, and you avoid a lot of the noise. We'll see in more details in literally a few minutes on the template side how to tweak that further, but this is really the starting point. If you have not configured these things and you have not tweaked it yet, you're leaving time and money on the table with your tags that you could use better. So once again, whether you have 1,000 device, 100 device, or 10,000 device, is the same process. You want to configure these things A partner I met on Monday, he grew all the way to 37,000 device, and because he set it up properly at the beginning, and now he's grown so much, he's happy and it still works for him. Where I have partners that have started with us, 20, 30 devices, and they're not at the 1,000 range. They go like, oh, it's so noisy, it doesn't work for us anymore, we're having all these issues, because they never took the time. And through this training that I mimicked through some of those discussions, they're able to now use it efficiently. And that's really just the starting point towards that. So, all right, I'll pass it back to Charles.
And there was a question about which PSAs, like a list of supported PSAs. But the reality is that the three that we integrate with at the API level, those are just three sort of examples. But any kind of integration that you can handle, that can handle creating tickets from an email gateway or SMS or whatever, you can format the email however you like to match it. Those will all work through the notification, through that notification settings that Mark just demoed. There's probably a million different systems that you could use. Some of them are going to be web gateways and things like that, but obviously can't support everything that exists in the world, but we've got good bulk of it covered just with what we've got there. And so now we get to the key to the RMM platform, which is the big M for monitoring, and that's what your customers are primarily paying you for, right? To keep an eye on all their systems, so they don't have to. They don't have to learn how to check to see if the hard drives are full, if the Windows is up to date. And if you don't set up monitoring the right way, when you add a client at first, you're probably going to hear about it when something breaks, and that's not something that you want to hear about from the customer. You want to know before they do. And so just as important as making things easy on yourself, the onboarding process with the PSAs and such, is making things really easy on yourself with templates. It's a lot easier to make changes to a handful of the default policies, default templates, than a separate policy for each customer. Most of the time, those general SLAs and agreements will be similar among your clients. You might have just a handful of service tiers based on the contract size, number of machines, type of machines, that sort of thing. If you consolidate the bulk of your sort of common settings into a template that you can apply, and you can adjust it easily from one customer to another, do your customization at the client level or the site level by adding checks in. And if you already have a stable of customers that are deployed, part of the reassessment that you do should be to consolidate under a handful of monitoring templates that you have. Ensure they still line up with the agreements that you have, but it's definitely a lot easier to manage and update and assess a handful of templates, maybe 5 or 10 or a dozen, versus 50 or 100 for 50 or 100 different customers. So I'll show you how to set up a sample template from one of the machines that you have in your network. So I have this little demo install here, and I've got a handful of devices, servers, workstations, and I've got one here that I want to use as my example. So I'm going to set it up to do the kinds of checks that I want to do for all the machines in this network. And what I'll do is set up, for instance, so we can turn on things like patch management, and sorry, why is my mouse acting off? Oh, for this guy, we've got a variety of settings for servers, and what we want to do is maybe make sure that patch management is definitely on, and we want to use this policy. We want to make sure that AV is on, and that we're setting the alerts for the processor, like Mark said, only after it fails a bunch of times. So we can go through and make all of these changes to the specific checks and policies for that server. And once we have it working where all the, everything's green and doing what we want it to do, and we're not getting inundated with a bunch of tickets that are sort of irrelevant or just noisy, then what we can do is take that server and we can use that server as a template for creating a monitoring template. And so the checks and tasks that we want to use on all of our subsequent servers are now in this template that I just created. So we've got the setting the frequency. I'll do it every 2 hours and start running at 6 a.m. Because it's a server, it should be on. And so all of these tasks and things are going to be included in the monitoring template that I just created, because they were already set up on this server and adjusted to how I like them. And if I want, I can change. So I can change this setting for failed logins. And 100 failed logins in 24 hours. It may seem like a lot, but with dictionary attacks and DDoS attacks and things, want to go ahead and close that off and nip it in the bud at 10 maybe. And then if we don't need the user auth stuff, we can remove that from the list. And so now we've got our template based on that server. Probably need to give it a better name, but we'll just hit OK. And now that template is available for the other servers to apply. And I can select my template from that machine and apply it, just like that. All right, so if you haven't already, definitely recommended viewing is the bootcamp that's focused on patch management. You can find that in the MSP Institute, and I'll put a link in the chat as well. But in a nutshell, just like with monitoring templates, the idea is to consolidate those patching policies so you don't have so many to keep track of and adjust, each individual one for each individual client. The general recommendation is to do checking for updates during the workday with your regular DSC, your daily safety checks, and then schedule the installations to happen when the machine is generally online, but hopefully at a time that's not too disruptive to the users on that machine. So updates, they're generally better now than they used to be about bogging down the computer, but every now and then you'll get some big install that has to move a lot of things around and make the fans go full blast, and you'll see a lot of please wait while the process finishes kind of messages. 11 a.m., 11:30 is a good window. Patches tend to download and install, and then if necessary, the machine can reboot while the user goes to lunch. And then when it comes to reporting, servers obviously should be higher priority. They're much more vulnerable to attacks, and so you want to have the reporting policy be give higher priority to servers. So if it misses a patch or it's out of date, you'll want to hear about it so that you can make sure that it's not wide open to something that's it's going to cause you trouble. Then there should be workstations, same sort of thing. Alerts if you're out of the SLA time, but generally report on missed or failed patches until they reach a certain threshold to where you want to make sure that they're run, and you may need to force the user to log out so that you can run those patches. Another thing that you're going to find is remote control. the policies for that. They can be all over the map again with different ways of connecting and that sort of thing. But there's really just a handful of policies, for instance, for take control, which works really well across platforms, has a bunch of nice remote management features as well for background tasks and recording sessions and so on. So to configure that with policy templates, we generally boil it down to 4 policies. So most of your customers are going to want one of those 4. The most sort of restricted is the monitor only, which gives the techs access to view the screen and when a user needs to show them something for troubleshooting, but there's no permission to actually take over the mouse and keyboard. There's no access there. For other clients, you'll want to be able to take over, but you want to ask permission first. So there's 2 options for that. Well, you can either automatically deny the permissions to take over if the user isn't there, or automatically grant permissions. So you can manually tell the machine to excuse me, run an update or reboot while the user goes to lunch, or without having to wait for them to come back from lunch to put in their password to set that up. And then finally, there's sort of the wide open option to be able to take over from the management side and do whatever you need without asking permission at all. It's kind of sketchy if you ask me, but if you have a customer, or if you have some machines that are, that nobody's ever logged into, but you still need to have access to do management on them, then that may be the way to go. As with any of these policies, we need to make sure that the device itself gets locked when you're done with the take control session. So check that box. Even if the user is still there sitting, waiting while you're fiddling with something in the OS, then you don't want to be responsible for leaving an active login session if they happen to have got up and walked away. The downside of that is that they wandered away to get a coffee and you're all done, and you walk away from your desktop, but somebody walks by and they see their login session still active, and they can sit down at their computer and send nasty emails, which is always problematic. So the tray icon for your Windows devices, it's it's pretty often overlooked. You may not even know that's a feature in RMM, even if you've been using RMM for a while now. The Windows tray icon is kind of a prime example of something small that can have a pretty big impact. It's a user-facing feature, whereas most of the things that we're talking about today are going to be under the hood. And as such, it's an opportunity for you to add in your branding, link to your website, helpful documentation, your YouTube channel where you do demos or screencasts, that sort of thing. Makes it really easy for the end user to create a ticket, ones that are actually useful. So automatically create a ticket with a screenshot attached of what's on the screen. Automatically include information, the software it's running, and so on. So if you look here on the right-hand side of the slide, we've got these variable strings, and if you put those into your email template, which I'll show you in just a minute, they will be replaced in the email that you get, and thus the ticket that you get through your PSA, with the name of the currently logged in user, the name of the site that they're at, whether they're in the Durham office or the Chapel Hill office, the name of the machine, and so on. So what we've got here, I'll open up my window again here. Again, move my GoToMeeting control panel out of the way. So I've got my Windows machine here, and if I want to go into the manage patch settings for that client, I don't want to do the servers, I'll do workstations. And for the desktops, I've got all these all these templates that I can apply, or really I should just have a handful. I need to go in and clean these out, Mark, because there's lots and lots of them. So if I go into, just look at the default desktop policy here. So in general, what we want to do is, do we want to alert on every missing patch? Probably not, because there's going to be some that come through that either fail or they get deferred or the machine's offline or whatever, but you definitely want to report those. And then if you're doing your patches, you can either do them manually, definitely not something that you would forget ever to do manually if you didn't have them scheduled. You can do a schedule, do it weekly. Let's say, like I was saying before, 11 a.m. Monday morning, right after your staff meetings and whatnot, and you've got a little while for it to run, check for updates, and then do the installs before you head to lunch on Monday. And then, excuse me, you've got these, you've got two categories here for different kinds of patches, whether they are high priority critical ones. You obviously want to approve those right away. But if Microsoft says they're important or moderate, maybe you want to approve them, or maybe you want to add them to your patching, your patch list manually. And then all these other low priority ones you can ignore, or again, leave them on manual, so you can add them in when they get to be important, or they get to be out of date. And then again, checking your patches during the week, and then set a time to actually install the patches. So we'll schedule the installation again Monday morning, so 11:30. So that gives it time to go and search for those patches, search for the updates, grab the catalog, and then download them, and then to actually do the installation, like I said, right before lunch. And if you need to reboot, you should reboot when it's required. And if an update is missed, you can either have it run at the next scheduled appointment on next Monday, or if that's going to be problematic for you and you're suddenly a week out of date, you want to probably run those as soon as that machine comes back online and checks in. Whether or not that includes the reboot, again, is going to be a matter of convenience to the users. But with a lot of these, the kinds of reboots that the kinds of installations that you do, most of the time you don't need a reboot. But if it's an important one, it's going to require a reboot. And if it's an important one, you want it to happen as soon as possible. And then finally, when it comes down to failed patches, do you want to automatically reprocess them? So do you want that to happen as soon as the machine fails, or on the next schedule? How often, how many times do you want it to give it a try before it then sends you an email that says that installation failed? So if there's a network congestion or some URL is broken, give it a few tries and then send the email when the installation's failed. And that's generally, times don't have that many digits in them. So generally, a few tweaks to the default patching policies will cover most eventualities. And then we'll skip the remote control settings for the most part, but as far as your the policies go, yeah, we've got the policies that I've talked about, which is open, which means you can go in and take control anytime you want, which like I said, it's a little sketchy for the end user to know that that's possible. But again, there's definitely places where that's appropriate. This one that's the no permissions policy basically is like I said before. You don't get access to the machine to control it. You can only view. And then there's the ask permissions policies there. And finally, the tray icon for Windows systems. Go into the settings for your workstation here. So you can have the hover action, the little tooltip pop up and say, enable, or you can make it, your friendly neighborhood MSP. Yay. Then in here, this is where it gets really fun. Is you can have a menu item that will automatically email a screenshot with this subject line. And if we go back to the it needs obviously it's going to email somebody. It needs to send the email to somebody. So just Charles. There we go. And in the subject line, if we go back here, these variable strings, you can go ahead and put the username and the site name and even the machine name and all that into the ticket or into the email with things like this, hashtag or £, client, support request, and so on. And you can go in and do your default body and subject to match whatever your PSA is expecting as far as filtering goes. And then that's in the Windows tray as a menu item. And then you can add menu after menu after menu, so you can have a link to your website, a link to how-tos, things like that I mentioned before. We've got anything that you can add as a link. You can have a shortcut to saving a screenshot, which is something that it should be real easy to do, but a lot of people forget how to do it. And it's a common enough request that you need it for support, for troubleshooting. I got this error message. What does the error message look like? I don't know, I didn't save a screenshot. So next time do that. You can have a link to a file that's local on that machine. So maybe it's a help file or a PDF that has instructions on how to submit tickets or how to print or what have you, or even just a blob of text that says whatever the office phone number is, whatever. So anything that's a quick reference that you want to put on those desktops is right there accessible. And again, it's a great opportunity for you to add your branding in so that it's personalized to you and your customers. Did I miss anything big, Mark?
No, you're good so far.
Okay, cool. Looks like I'm going through a little bit more quickly. We're about an hour in, and we're going to talk now about the optional features of RMM. Up to this point, everything that we've been showing, everything that we talked about has been included in RMM by default, sort of out of the box kind of features. But the next few things that we're going to show you are optional installs. So some of them are going to add an extra cost to your license, so just be aware. And just so you know, Mark and I, we're not in sales, and this is not intended to be an upsell to get you to buy more stuff. We're just including this for informational purposes. And the thing is, you may already have these these turned on and paying for them, but you're not necessarily using them all, or you're not using, using all of the capabilities of things like our managed antivirus and EDR. So these two are third-party integrations. The managed antivirus integration is Bitdefender, and the default settings, again, generally recommended to leave them alone unless you have a specific need or a client has a specific need for excluding certain file types or being more aggressive about locking down certain files or certain drives, that kind of thing. It's another opportunity for you to add your branding to the agent so that the end users see your logo and not the generic Bitdefender one, and that way they know that you're the one providing that. When something comes up or when it gives them a warning about some piece of malware that was quarantined, you get credit for it. So similar to patching, you'll want to run the scans when the machine's on, and ideally when a full scan. Sometimes that can slow down the machine as well. That kind of thing, you don't want it to disrupt productivity. So schedule it to happen on a different day than your patches and updates, so they don't collide with each other. And then the sort of step up the evolution from antivirus scanning, checking files for malware, is endpoint detection, EDR. Don't you love all these acronyms? It's a system that alerts you on the machine's behavior and activity patterns rather than relying on scanning for files and comparing signatures and that sort of thing. The EDR integration is with Sentinel-1, and it needs to be enabled in your RMM integrations before you can configure it. And again, the recommended default policy is to set it to protect, one step up from just detecting and alerting. It will actually quarantine, remediate, and not just send you an alert that your machine is doing bad things or potentially doing bad things. It'll actually lock down the bad thing that it's doing automatically. And there's a lot more, of course, to security than just AV and EDR. So I suggest you have a look at the security boot camps, again, on the MSP Institute. And I'll put a link to those in the chat as well. Our security nerd, Lewis, does a monthly office hours on Patch Tuesdays and all the new threats that are out on the horizon, new things to be wary of, and also answers questions about what sort of things you can do to lock down your system or your customer's network. These four are they're not third party. These are actually homegrown. N-able's built these features so you can turn them on and basically add more depth to your reporting and the protections that you can offer to your customers. So we've got risk intelligence, sort of like a cousin to your managed AV. It scans the machine periodically, but it's not scanning for infected or suspicious files. It's profiling the machine's software configurations, the connections, looking for vulnerabilities in places where it might be out of compliance with security policies or GDPR, that sort of thing. What data are you storing in the open? Is it unencrypted? What services are running that are open to the internet and there are known vulnerabilities for? Again, it can be a performance hit when those deeper data scans run. Again, once a month probably should be sufficient for those, and then once a week for the more general security scan, the one that checks your configurations and connections and such. And you do need to review the reports. Don't just let them pile up and have peace of mind by actually looking at them to see what it's found, and make sure that you're in compliance, because you or your clients can actually be liable for things if you're storing things like credit cards and social security numbers in an accessible way. NetPath is really handy. I like it. It's a great visual demo to show to your customers. If you've ever used command line traceroute to diagnose your network connection, speed, latency issues, NetPath gives you a historic view of the data things like ping times, bandwidth use, how your traffic's routed around the internet. That's great, and I'll show you that in just a minute. I shouldn't need to tell anybody about the importance of backup. So I like to paraphrase what my dentist tells me. You'll only need to brush the teeth you want to keep. So only back up the data you want to keep. Obviously, if it's not backed up today, it may as well not exist. When it comes to backups, the cloud backups can take a lot of bandwidth off of your machines, especially if they're all on the same network. And even if you're working with all remote users, all home networks, that full initial backup can sometimes swamp a slower home connection if it's running during a Zoom meeting, for instance. So there's the backup uses a throttling feature and what's called a local speed vault to mitigate against that. And the other thing is that we recommend you lock down the user-facing backup interface so that it's password protected, at least, so most of your end users shouldn't be mucking around with what does and doesn't get backed up anyway. Finally, you've got web protection, which again, kind of like NetPath, it's a great tool for you to show your customers, and you can demo how to keep their employees off the bad parts of the web, or maybe the good parts of the web, depending on what your priorities are. The default settings should be sufficient for most purposes. There's a bunch of options. You can go really deep into what you can block and what you can't, and allow lists and block lists, or you can go in and tweak the scheduling, so you can schedule blocking for things like on hours and off hours, for social media, for streaming if it's gaming, if that's a problem for them. And even if your customers are they're not keen on actually blocking sites and traffic, the Web Protect will do a reporting on whatever the activity is that you want to report on. So how much of your bandwidth is being used up by that streaming music while people work, and with that you can find out.
So yeah, so the main point here on the security front is whether you go with EDR, right, the EDR integrated one here, or whether you go with EDR standalone, or whether you go to your own AV or the managed AV, is to configure it in a way that makes sense to you. For example, if I say I'm going to turn it on and use a specific policy for all my servers, or for specific servers, or whatever the case is, oh, that's patch, that's wrong. In these configs under policy, you have the option, if you want, to make the policy have your own branding, be a little more aggressive, less aggressive, and so on. And this is a very, very important thing to take into account as you're gonna set up the AV. Is what is the tolerance of your customer to vulnerabilities, and also what is their tolerance to performance hits. AV is these days not a big deal. EDR is even better. Like, you can barely notice it runs, so it's not a big deal. But I think I'm having the same issue as you on the screen. But either way, it's just should read out. But the AV, the main thing to keep in mind is go through and brand it with your own stuff, so that if they have an issue or a question, they can call you. That's a huge important point to start with. Once you've done that, configure it and deploy it according to whatever you want to do through here. And through the policies. So that's really, really what it comes down to. On the EDR front, it's just a matter of going into the EDR portal here and configuring your own setting. I actually did a presentation yesterday at an event here in Rockford, in Chicago, is Illinois, right? Yeah, Illinois.
Illinois.
Yeah. Man, the States.
You'll have to excuse Mark. He's Canadian.
Fair enough. And I was presenting on the implementation of an EDR platform, and in the settings you can choose. Do you want to remediate? Do you want to quarantine? Do you want to just detect? Do you want to do this? Do you want to do that? And this is where you can figure all of that. If you have the platform, if you've never touched the settings, definitely go watch the EDR bootcamp that we have, and this really, really makes it easier. It's not just easier, it actually is more reliable. So super important. And yeah, I think the UI is just freaking out on that security front. So if you want to just take control back, you should be able to go through the rest with no issues.
Mostly because it's a very visual tool for something that can be really kind of technical and geeky. And you do that with a managed network. So if you've got a customer here that you can get to install an agent on their network, that will give you access to creating what are called paths. And so what I'm going to do is just take this server here, and I'm going to install the agent to run the check on this machine, and next. And then what I can do is, for instance, fast.com is Netflix's CDN, their content network. For fast.com is the gateway for doing speed tests and such. So you can have it check connectivity to a website or an IP address, and then a specific port. So whether it's a web port or SSL or DNS or some custom port for management, that kind of thing. And you can have the probe run as frequently as every 5 minutes, or every 2 hours, or what have you. I've got one here that I set up earlier that's been running every few minutes since this morning, and that's the connection between my demo network and the Cloudflare DNS server at 1111. And you can see here that it's giving me the path from my server to that DNS server. And it looks like right now it's almost immediate. It's no packet loss, no hiccups in the speed. And if I go to the historical view, I can see, well, again, this one hasn't been running for very long, but since this morning at least. The other thing you can do, let me go back and I'll show you one that actually has some history to it. So you can see that right now the network is probably doing fine as far as the connection goes between your network and, in this case, Microsoft Office 365. But in the past, it's had some kind of funky problems with speed, and it's gone through all these different convolutions as far as how to get there. So if you notice a problem with your connection happening in a particular way or on a particular day and time, you can find out what's going on there. So sometimes you're getting routed to this node that gets timeouts, and that's why the ping time went really high. And then it switched to this IP address to go through off to Office 365. And then sometimes the DNS will direct it to this IP number, and sometimes that IP number. And you can drill down and see all the details of the routing and stuff, and see where your ISP might be breaking down, or where maybe there's a router or a switch somewhere in your network that's failing over sometimes. And you can see, like I said, the historical view of how that happened. I'm sorry, I keep trying to zoom in with the wrong key. How those things happened, and what the result was. And again, like I said, it's a great sort of visual marker of how much information you're gathering or able to gather from your customers' networks. I could show you a brief overview of backup as well. We are getting probably a little bit low on time, but in general, when it comes to backup, you want to back up all the things. That's just it. Just make sure that you're doing everything needs to get backed up, and you can configure that with your backup settings. You'll want to have your general settings, turn on. Everything gets backed up. You've got the ability to go in and include and exclude directories or filters that have wildcards in them for file name types, things like that. You can have the backup run as soon as the machine comes back online. If it's missed a backup, if it's offline or the machine's sleeping or the user's on vacation or whatever, as soon as they come back in, and make sure it runs those missed backups, whether it's an image backup or a file backup, or doing those snapshots and things. And this is where I talked before about the throttling for bandwidth. So if you know that all of your machines are trying to run backups during business hours from 9 to 5 or whatever, you want to limit that bandwidth to, I don't know if it needs to be 150K per second, but whatever. And then on the weekends, if they're online anytime, you don't need to do that limitation. And then the local speed vault is a real boost for that processor and network usage, because it'll back up to a local drive, local path before it goes to the cloud. And then you've got this setting here for password protecting the backup manager. So you've got a little bit of protection there to keep the end users from turning off inclusions and exclusions there. Eric, our backup nerd, did an epic presentation the other day, and he does a whole lot of really in-depth stuff talking about backup and the technology behind it, and how to do bare metal restores and all of that. Again, his content on the MSP Institute is definitely worth a watch, especially if you're interested in the nitty-gritty details about how to sort of maximize the bandwidth that you're using for backing up all this stuff over your network to the cloud. Again, highly recommended for that. And when we, before we take a break, very quickly go over, the web protection settings. So for this, you can go into the web protect policy, and there's a few recommended sort of default policies that you should set up. One of them is going to be reporting only. So it's not blocking anything, but it's still has all the filters and policy stuff set in it, but it's not actually doing any blocking. So it's report only. So we've got all of these different checks that you can do. You can have it notify when a machine has used a lot of bandwidth for some reason. Maybe it's suddenly hosting BitTorrent or watching movies on Netflix when they should be working. You can block or report on a variety of categories, things like drugs and porn, but also things like social networks and dating sites, games and all of that. And then, do you do all of your shopping at work? Searching for videos and memes and that kind of thing. But if it's a site that that you need to be able to access for research, or if it's one of your customer sites and maybe they're a questionable business according to the block list, you can add them to the allow list. And then you can also schedule the allowing and blocking to happen based on time of day. But the reporting, the reports that you get, sorry, the screen here is okay. No, I don't want to save those changes, but what we can do here is show the web protect reports, and you can see all of the information that you can get from a network. And in this case, it was just just set up for reporting, not actually blocking anything. But you can see that my bandwidth for this network peaked a couple of particular days. Which machines are using the most, making the most web requests, using the most bandwidth, the categories that they're going to. You don't want to find out that people are using proxy, avoiding anonymizers so that they can get to content that's verboten. And then you can get a rundown of all the actual websites and domains that they're connecting to. In this case, it was obviously checking for updates and downloading things from office.com or windows.com for 365 updates. And then you can see which sites and categories got blocked. In this case, again, it was just for reporting, but not actually blocking anything. And drill down. You can see what all those things that it would have blocked, or all those sites that the machines went to, and how much they were actually downloading. So this machine grabbed 2 gigabytes from various places with 4 million requests. So that machine is obviously doing something. And in that case, it's probably the machine that I set up the network monitoring on. So it was checking with the network and checking in to RMM to report it. So anyhow, so that's a general overview of WebProtect and what kinds of information you can get for that. And again, it's another really great visual demo for your customers so that they can see really what kinds of things you're protecting them from and what kinds of information you can get to them. Another question about NetPath or WebProtect was, correlating things between WebProtect and some kind of edge device that's sitting in a basically in a hardware and a switch at the edge of the network, as far as bandwidth utilization, that sort of thing. That is a good question for the NetPath folks, and I might pass that along. They may have some metrics on that as far as how it compares. Anything that is that's running on the user's desktop is going to be a little bit different as far as what it can reach and what it can control, versus something that's sitting at the edge of the network. Obviously, something that's between the user and his browser is going to be able to block more things and detect more things at that particular point. Something that's sitting on the network is going to be able to see all the traffic that goes across it, not just specific apps or specific ports and protocols. So they're going to cover different things. So it would be a good question to ask as far as their how they correlate. The use case for NetPath is more for diagnosing network congestion issues, or figuring out where something that might be an upstream problem or a local problem actually exists. If the ping time to your DNS server that happens to be 2 hops away suddenly spikes, it could be that server is offline, or it could be that something between you and the server is offline. It's going to mess with your performance either way, because you can't resolve things and your DNS is offline. So it's more for probably more complex networks than a bunch of a handful of machines in an office or a bunch of remote workers, because they're not sharing the same network anyway. So the use case for NetPath is more for diagnosing the kinds of network issues that you generally have to drop into a command line and do things like packet captures and stuff like that. It doesn't do it won't tell you if a cable, one of your Ethernet polls as bad, but it will do most of the kinds of things that you can do from a workstation to check your network. So, and plus it's pretty. It gives you a really pretty graph to show you just how broken your network is between you and Google. Anyhow, so let's get on with the actual main event, which is deploying the RMM agent to your customers' devices. Actually, Mark, did you have anything else to add? Any other wisdom to share?
Nope, so far you're doing good.
So deploying RMM comes in a couple of different ways. You can install the agent on a customer's device with the generic installer, which requires the person or the technician that's installing it to authenticate to RMM, and then click next a bunch of times and agree to all the agreements and things. It's not ideal, but it's sort of the least common denominator option in the event that you actually need it. You can also download the installer as an MSI file, and that works as a group policy for installing through PowerShell, pushing out through an Active Directory domain, or however you push out group policies. The other option, the sort of default that we recommend people use, is the third one, is the remote worker. It's an exe file that you push out either to a shared drive or put on the put on the customer's machine somehow. Basically a one-click install. It's unattended. I keep saying unintended instead of unattended, but it's a one-click install. They don't have to put in any credentials for RMM because that's embedded in the token, or embedded. The token is embedded in the file, and that's the same for the GPO installer as well. And the last option is a huge time saver because you can use just one device to install and discover and push the agent to all the other devices that it can see on the network. So you would install the RMM agent and the network discovery agent onto one device and then let it do the heavy lifting for you. So I will very briefly demo that as well. So what we can see here is go into a bigger network here, I think. So you can see here that you've got the agent download links here. You can download the Windows agent, Mac and Linux agents, and that's just the installer package itself. If you want to do the site installation package, that's where you'll get those sort of pre-authorized one-click installers. So you determine what client it is for which site, and then you can either install the Windows agent or the Mac agents. And then these that say RC, those are release candidates. Those are pre-release versions. Usually if they show up here, they're pretty much done as far as bugs and things, and there's no major concerns, but it's kind of a crapshoot because you might find something that gets becomes a problem with an RC. So if I wanted to download the Windows agent, if I need to, I can go through proxy, but I shouldn't need to in most cases. And you hit next, and so this is where you decide whether you want that GPO or the remote worker, and then just download it. And suddenly I have a zip file that I can put on a shared drive or push out through email or what have you, and get it on the customer's machine. So that's all well and good, but the network install is even more fun. So what we can do is see the network of devices.
Yeah, it seems like the UI is giving us a hard time on our demo environment today. If we can't show it, just explain it, right? Like the main thing here is when you go to networks, you click on the little network drop down right there. You can add the networks that you want to manage. You can find the devices. You can set them to the proper type of devices, enter the credential, and import them. So that is a way that you have to, discover the subnets where your customers are, import the devices in, and not have to go and give them a link or an installer or something to do it by hand. Now, if they have a domain, Azure AD with Intune, if they have different methods, different architecture in place, you don't need any of that. But let's say they don't, the networks tab will give you a visibility into what you have, network devices, switch, router, things like that. Then you can import them and they will go into the proper tabs from there. Now we're maybe having an issue with the UI for us in our demo box, but it's just a matter of getting that data out. So I mean, considering we're already, again, slightly behind schedule, I would just I would just kind of move to the next topic if we can.
Okay. Well, the next topic is actually managing those network devices. Monitor the network devices that you can't install the agent on directly. Things like switches, printers, your network connected toaster, whatever you can ping on the network, you can therefore monitor it. So if it's on or if it's off, if it's responding to things on a request on a certain port, that sort of thing. And if it's something you can manage through SNMP, the Simple Network Management Protocol, I think, there's a whole slew of information you can see on those devices. And whatever you can see, whatever you can report, or whatever information you can get from that machine, you can report on it. You can set alerts on it, set your thresholds for things like hard drive failures, things like how much memory is being used on the switches, how many ports are active, that sort of thing. So all of that leads up to the post deployment. So you've deployed everything, you've found all the items that are manageable on your network, and you've set up all of your templates, and you've done all the hard work of the deployment. But now all that's left is everything else, which is basically reviewing everything that you've done. So you've set up monitoring. Now you actually have to monitor it. Is everything reporting what it should? Is it filling up your queue with notifications? Are they notifications that you can safely ignore, or are they things that are actually failing? Or is it something where you've mistyped an IP address and something doesn't exist there, and so it's giving you a bunch of failures? So if that's the case, obviously you go into the monitoring template, remove the checks that aren't applicable, or adjust those failure states and thresholds so that they do make sense. You have a look at the notifications you've received. Maybe right after you've done the installation, the deployment for a site, you check after an hour and see if there's things that are alerting right away. Then you check again a day later, or again after a few days, because those scheduled checks do have to have a chance to run. And if they fail, they need to be able to send their notices, create the tickets like you expected. So you have to give things time to go through all the convolutions before they would get to you, and sometimes it takes a day or two for those things to even trigger. So if that's the case, are you getting the tickets that you want? Or are you getting tickets that are actionable, things that are just alerts? Just set them to notifications instead of creating a ticket each time, or automatically close a ticket if it's something that resolves itself, or that you've got your automations set up to take care of. So instead of leaving a bunch of open tickets that are already resolved, set it to automatically closing. Obviously, the big sort of marquee features your customers are probably going to pay the most attention to, things like patching. Did those updates run without errors? And then the self-service functions from the tray icon. You want to try and test those out. Make sure that you're getting the emails that you want, and that the variable substitution is giving you the information that you need for those tickets to generate, if it's going into your PSA and getting filtered the right way. Are you actually getting the screenshots? So all of those things are good to test, and now is the good time to determine, well, maybe what needs to be automated or set up for self-healing. If it's something that you're doing a lot, or if you do it more than twice, automate it. That's my mantra when it comes to that sort of thing. In the IT world, you'll sometimes hear, everything's working great. Why are we paying you so much? And then the next day you'll hear, everything's broken. Why are we paying you so much? So if monitoring is where you actually earn your keep, reporting is where you can justify how much you're charging to your clients. So just like in algebra class, you got to show your work, and that's where reports are. So What reports should you use? RMM lets you create reports that slice and segment the information about your customer's network pretty much any way you like. Most of the time, you'll probably stick to a few standard reports that are more accessible and generally usable. Asset tracking is probably key, since it's important to know what you've got, even if it's how many machines you're managing, to know how much you should be charging, or how much the utilization is of what's going on or what's going offline. Health reports for servers that you manage, things like uptime. Again, the resource utilization, what patches were applied, what was deferred. Probably once a month is okay for server health reports. Otherwise, it's just going to be generating a lot of noise to sift through for the meaningful information. Obviously, if you have an SLA that is a quicker turnaround than that, or if you're dealing with compliance issues, you want to make sure that those reports come in and you're in alignment with your compliance agreements. The executive summary report, and I'll show you a sample of that, sort of a high-level overview of all the devices that you've gotten under management, what actions have been taken, the issues that have been raised and resolved. This is a little bit different kind of report in that you can't just run it on demand. It's basically compiling data over the time period that it's running, and so it can only run on a schedule, and so you'll get the automated result of it, but you can't necessarily just push a button and get the report like most of the others. Again, the customer focus will very often be on patches. So what machines are out of date? What's potentially vulnerable? Have you fixed everything that we heard about on CNN last night about computers being hacked, that sort of thing? So with the patch management report, you get a list of all the patches that ran, which devices they were applied to, and so on. What kinds of things might still be vulnerable, and why they failed oftentimes. So let's take a look at some of the actual reports that you can run. And I will start with the executive summary report, because again, that is sort of a different kind of report. You can't just set it to run. It has to be automated. So the executive summary report, you can change the settings here, and you can get the example report for the month. And so with the report you'll get for an actual customer, it'll be your branding here. It's a PDF, and it'll have all of this information for again, sort of a general overview: what's passing, what's failing, what's been resolved. So if this number is good, that means that things were fixed, and then how effective your AV setup was. Web protection was blocking a bunch of malicious requests. Patch management is on top, and then you've got all of these. This number of patches were installed over the course of that month. So you've got your sort of detailed overview in other reports, but this is more of the high level, hence it's called the executive summary. So this is great to send along to your customer with maybe with your bill or with your update for them on performance and other things. But there's all kinds of other reports that you can do. The other report that let me see here. The asset tracking is one of the important ones that we talked about. So you can see the asset tracking reports here, and it'll give you details on individual machines, what hardware they're running on. In this case, it was a virtual machine, but also what software it's running, what's installed, what versions of things are installed, which of the updates were installed since the last time it was cleared or refreshed, what patches have been run, and then a lot of times you'll see a lot more information here about what the actual patch name. It fixes the malicious software removal tool, so that's what was installed. Or actually, these were the missing ones, but these were installed. And then you can drill down into your actual reporting and see everything all at once with things like the modification report, which will tell you more information than you could probably ever really need about when changes happened, what the changes were, and then the before and after of an update from version 1 to version 2, or these things were removed, these things were added, and it just goes and goes and goes and goes if you've got lots of information, or you've got lots of machines that you've got under management. Those reports can come in as an XML file or a SQL data dump, and that's for importing into some kind of asset tracking that you might have that takes, that's a SQL database, or something that'll parse the XML data for, diffs between before and after, and whatever you end up using those for. It's just just formatted in that way. And then you've got things like your inventory report. So it'll tell you how many machines you have, what operating systems they're running, just things like the physical assets that you have, and you can tell right away what the breakdown of things are in that network. All right, so looking at the questions that we have here in the Q&A, is EDR built into dashboard yet? I'm not sure exactly what the question is there. It's not in the same interface with the monitoring sorts of tasks. EDR is down here with the integrations. So if that's your question, it's there. It's just on the under the integrations, because it's a very different kind of product and a different kind of interface. So it pulls out into a different sort of a different UI. What name will the device appear as? How to change the proper site name or ID? Okay, when you get a new device into your network, it will generally show up with whatever the the sort of default whatever the workstation's been assigned when it was first installed, and the site and client that it gets pulled into is going to be based on the settings of the site installation package itself. So if I send out the installer for my break fix Emporium here, and I set it to the site of Orbital Outpost, the machine, when it comes online, is going to appear in the Orbital Outpost. It'll just pop up in this list. So if you're getting machines coming into the wrong client or the wrong site, it's maybe that you're sending out the installer that you made, the file that you generated yesterday instead of the file you generated today, or you selected the wrong thing in that site install package. And then once you get a machine into your listing here, if you go to if you right click on it and just edit that workstation, it gives you the a field for the description. And then if you want to have a different name than what the device itself thinks it's called, you can just uncheck that box. And so this will be my server. So when you're on the machine, it'll say one thing, but in RMM, it'll be listed as this this workstation name that you assign. So hopefully that answers that question about that. Branding the executive report, that is going to be under your, is that in your general settings, Mark? As far as the branding stuff?
For the AV?
Logo? No, for the reporting. So putting in your logo to the report.
Yeah, it's actually in the online help. So if you click cancel out of that.
Okay.
Go to the little question mark button.
Mm-hmm.
Click on support center.
Mm-hmm.
Click on user manual. And just search for the word branding. Honestly, the online help for RMM is actually pretty amazing. If you just search for branding, you should be able to quickly find it. There's an article on how to brand. There it is, the second one.
Oh, yeah.
And then it walks you through the from email that we got this morning is right there.
Oh, yeah.
Then if you want to do the color scheme, your logo, and this will apply to reports. So it walks you through what you need to do.
Right. So yeah, there it is. That's the logo itself will get applied to your the user-facing stuff, but also that's the same image that will go onto the reports. So
yep.
In your general settings for your MSP company, as opposed to your MSP level, as opposed to your customer level, you should be able to see.
If I'm not mistaken, this needs to be enabled, and I never bothered to enable it in my demo.
Yeah, so anyhow, that will be the place to do it. And then possible to rebrand some of the things for EDR instead of Sentinel-1. Does EDR let you do rebranding? I'm not sure if it does.
No, it does not.
Okay.
Their agent's also a lot more lightweight. It doesn't show as much as AV Defender does. It's somewhat intentional that way, but yeah, because of that, you can't.
Yeah, there are a couple of questions about more specific problems with agents not responding, that sort of thing. If you do have a question about something that's not working, I definitely recommend you open a support ticket for that. The the specific troubleshooting is not something that I can go through in the span of the boot camp, but the support folks can get all the log files and configurations and stuff and help you walk through that. Oh, and Dwayne says that custom branding is an additional charge.
That's why, yeah. Okay, that makes sense. Yeah. I forgot about that. Sorry, there is two quick questions that we didn't answer. EDR on Mac, yes, it's possible. Reach out to your PSM. They can make sure that you are directed to the right place. That's easy. So Eric, you can absolutely do that. The other one is deploying through the Azure network. Azure AD does not have a GPO type of deployment. If you're not familiar with that, you would have to use Intune. If your customer uses Intune, then you would be able to use Intune to deploy the agent. That would be the only way. So do keep that in mind, Lewis, on that side. So yeah, so those are the ones we missed. Sorry.
That's all right. The EDR for Mac is, I'm not sure if that's done baking yet. If it's available, it's
built in now.
Brand new. Is it?
Yeah. So when you go to your agent, you can enable the feature just like you would for anything else, and deploy EDR for Mac. That was added maybe a month or two ago. It was pretty recent.
Okay. Yeah. Last I did this installation, it was all managed AV was the only thing that we could do. Oh, that's right. Web Protect was not is not on the Mac stuff yet. So, but EDR definitely is. So great.
I think that's it.
Yeah, as I was saying, I'm going to grab the questions and answers from go to webinar, and I'll get back to you if through email if there's something that I can help you with that we didn't answer directly. Otherwise, look for a follow-up email from me. And if you do have any feedback or suggestions, I would appreciate it. I'm going to put my email into the chat again, so If you have a question that comes up later, or suggestions, requests, comments, recipes for chocolate chip cookies that you want to share, please do. Otherwise, I will bid you good day and thank you for your patience.